Welcome to 242 Students Online. My name's Kelly, and I'm one of your online pastors around here. And while I've been in quarantine the past few months, I've come across some stories of a lot of really cool things that were invented during other times of quarantine and social distancing in our past. So let's play a game. Can you guess what was invented or created by the hint that we give? Let's find out. All right, first up. No, it wasn't football. Actually, Isaac Newton thought of the theory of gravity during the bubonic plague in England.
Bruh.
Crazy. All right, next up, see if you can guess this. Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press during the 150 years that the plague was going around Europe. And this is what it could have looked like. That's a lot different than what we use today. Ooh! All right, how are you doing so far? We got one more for you. Ready? La! Victor Hugo wrote Les Mis while in exile from his home country of France. And I think we're all glad that he did so that we could learn who could sing and who can't sing. So, as we start the service, think about what you're going to do during this season. And it doesn't have to be as big as inventing the law of gravity. But don't miss this opportunity to do something with the time that you've been given. So check out our final week of our series, Voices.
Can I share a story with you guys? Growing up, one of my favorite things my family would do was go on vacations. It was always about adventure, and you want to know how you get to adventure? Via road trip. And so many of you are already like, oh, road trips are the worst. But honestly, they're fun. This is pre-iPad. This is pre-iPod. And so, and even before my family, each of us got personal DVD players, which you're like, Matt, was this before Blu-ray? It was. And so before that, one specific family vacation we went on, I had to have been early middle school. My brother, who's 7 years younger than me, he was sort of just starting to learn to talk, and for some reason he got fixated on the word /number 9. Okay, so no matter what, a lot of times he would just say 9, and my sister and I, who's also younger than me, we decided that we were going to have some fun with this. And so every restaurant we went to, we would tell the waiter or waitress, we'd be like, hey, our brother, super brilliant. Ask him what the square root of 81 is. And my brother would go, 9. And we'd be like, see? And then my dad, engineer at Ford, really smart guy, would come up with these big math problems, and all of their answers were always 9. And so we would also feed those to people who we're interacting with, and he would go 9, and it'd be like, whoa. And so for me, every time I see the number 9 or hear the number 9, my mind goes back to that trip. It goes back to that vacation with my family. And that's the power of story. That's the power of really what we've been talking about in the series, Voices. We've been hearing the stories of how people have been impacted and how God has worked in their lives. And so as we finish this series, I want to continue that conversation. We're going to be turning to the Bible in a second. And what the Bible really is a story of God's love for us. How he wanted to be in relationship with us and how Jesus came to make things right in the world. But honestly, two of the books in the Bible that if we lean into, if we look at the very beginning of them, it speaks to the power of story. And those are the books of Luke and Acts, who were written by the same guy, Luke, to this man Theophilus. And this is what he says in Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 1. It says, "In as much as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us," basically saying, hey, a lot of people have tried to record and write down the story of things that we've been told. just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, saying, hey, people who were there have told us these things. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time now, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, saying, hey, I've heard all this stuff. I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of work. I went to the library. I went and talked to people, but I'm compiling this for you, Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. And so what Luke is basically saying here is saying, hey, I've spent some time making sure this story that I'm about to share with you about Jesus and about the early church is true. And so, and those that gospel of Luke and the other gospels, and then you have the book of Acts, those are stories of how Jesus and his church impacted his community and the world. And so for you, what's your story? Because the reality is, at the end of this quarantine, at the end of the social distancing thing, at the end of this summer, we are all going to have a story. Some of us, that story has been, we have not been outside of our property, the property lines, our yard, our house since April. We haven't left. We haven't seen anyone other than our families. Others of us, maybe you've gone on vacation during this time, but it felt a little weird or different, and you're hanging out with people. And others of us, maybe we're in the middle somewhere, where we've seen some people, but socially distanced. We have gone to the store, but with masks on. And it seems weird. But at the end of this, we all are going to have a story. We all are going to have a story that, honestly, God's worked a lot during this time. Some of you have decided to dive deeper into daily encounter and reading your Bible. Others of you have spent more time in small group than you did pre-COVID. You are at small group every week. You've been talking to your small group leader, even when you're not meeting for small group. And that's been awesome. But all of us have a different story. Can I share another story with you guys? This one is me in high school, okay? And it was I believe, a fall retreat. And God did a lot in my life during that retreat, when I think back on it. But the very last session, we looked at the book of Joshua, which many of you are familiar with because of Jericho and walking around the city and the walls fell down and VeggieTales. But there's a couple chapters before that happens. God does something very intentional with his people, the people of Israel, to make sure they don't forget what he was doing. See, they were on one side of a river and they needed to get to the other. And so God parted the river, it's the Jordan River, and he instructed a man from every tribe, or a man from every extended family group, needed to pick up a rock from the river bed and bring it with them. And this is why he asked them to do it. Again, this is Joshua chapter 4. And that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask you in a time to come, what does these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And I remember sitting there listening to someone teaching on this and saying, do not forget what God did in your life this weekend. And honestly, that's my challenge to you, is don't let yourself forget what God did in your life this summer. Or don't let you forget what God did in your life during this quarantine. And what we did that retreat is we left the auditorium and we were instructed to go find rocks and take those rocks with us to remember what God has done. And so for you, what do you need to do to remember what God has done? Maybe for you, you need to write your story out on a piece of paper of just, God did this. And if that's you, we want to hear those stories. Your students pastor wants to hear that story. Your small group leader wants to hear that story. Many of us would be encouraged by your story. And so go to 242community.com/student story and share your story with us. Others of you want that physical reminder. And so whether it's you're artistic and you need to draw a mask with a Bible verse that really impacted you during this time, or maybe it's going and finding a rock and putting it on your bedside table to remember what God has done. This is the thing, we're about to enter into a time of encounter. And encounter is a time where you and we get to take that next step with God and really listen to God of what he wants us to do. See, the reality is all of us have a different story, and that story is built up by many next steps. Many of you have been baptized, and maybe for you, you want your story in quarantine. You want the thing you remember about this season is you being all in and saying yes to Jesus by getting baptized. And if you've not been baptized yet and you want to, fill out the next steps card that's being posted in the chat right now. / is posted in the description below. Others of you, again, Daily Encounter has been an awesome next step for you during this time. So be intentional to remember that. Write down that verse that has really impacted you and put it on your mirror, put it somewhere that you will see and remember what God has done during this time. Maybe for you, your small group has meant more to you now than it did before. And maybe for you, you need to find a picture. Maybe it's a picture before COVID, or maybe it's a picture from a socially distanced hangout during this time of you and your small group. And you need to get it printed out and put it somewhere to remember how God used that group of boys or girls, of young men and young women to impact you during this time. The reality is we all have a story. We all have a voice. We all have been impacted in some way, positive or negative, during this time. We all have a story to share. So will you share your story? Will you be intentional to remember your story? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for these students, Lord. I pray that ultimately you will help them see how you have worked in their lives during this time, that they will see their story and share their story, and that ultimately they will remember their story, that they won't let what you are doing be forgotten in their lives. I pray all this in your Son's holy, precious, and powerful name. Amen.
Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle is the place where you promised is in this place. Come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Not for a minute was I forsaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Come, Holy Spirit, dry bones awaken. The Lord is in this place. The Lord is in this place. Not enough unless you come. You meet me here again. 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here
That was awesome. Thanks for joining us for 242 Students Online. But don't stop there. Fill out a Next Steps card to join an online small group and let us know how we can help you take your next step with God. Be sure to invite a friend next week and join us live for 242 Students Online. Bye!